Hi, this is David Shannon. Today I'd like to talk a little about specifying electroshades. You may know them as motorized shades. We like to call them electroshades. The first thing when you're considering using electroshades on your project is to think about what kind of motors you're using. We represent Meco Systems, which makes the most cutting-edge motor on the market today. The newest motor that we utilize is called the WhisperShade IQ motor. This is an incredible motor that is powerful, it is quiet, and it is an intelligent motor, which means it can accept two-way communication. Now, a lot of people are in the market with low voltage motors nowadays, and it's important to note that the reason we use line voltage motors with our WhisperShade IQ technology is because they are much more powerful. People may tell you, well, you can't do a shade that large, or we have to break these shades up. That's usually because their motor is a weak motor. The MecoShade WhisperShade IQ motor is very powerful. We can do very large motors, and they're also very quiet. You can't even hear them nowadays. And what we do is we utilize line voltage, which powers up the motors, which is very simple. It just means that the motor has to be attached to a junction box. But then from that point down, everything is low voltage Cat5 wiring, sort of a plug-and-play technology. So it's very simple. The next thing you want to consider when you're specifying your shades is, how do I want to group the shades together? That's one of the things we can do with our system, which is really nice. You might decide that I want all the shades on one elevation in a space to operate together. You might want all the shades in the space on two elevations to work together. You might want all the shades on your entire building elevation to operate together. You have all of that flexibility. And of course, you can always have an override with local switches, which is what people usually like to do. And speaking of the switches, we have intelligent switches to go along with the motors, which means the shades can go fully up, fully down, and 3 preset positions in between, which can be set for your specific project. This gives you a lot of flexibility, and of course utilizes one of the things that we like to say is one of the best things about shades, and that is they are only there when you need them. They're only there to the extent that you need them, and when they are there, they look really nice. In other words, if the sun is only in the top 8 inches of the window, why have the shade all the way down? Just have the shade down far enough to cut off the incident angle of the sun, but to allow as much daylight into the space as possible without affecting the people. The next thing you want to talk about when you're specifying electroshades, people ask me about the size. We typically do shades that are 20 feet wide. I mean, this is a common occurrence. We can go larger, by the way, but at 20 feet we still have a very low profile in section of the shade. So we can do shades up to 20 feet, or you can also slave shade bands together. We have a rule of thumb that you can do up to 35 feet of shades controlled by one of these powerful motors. And this can also be 4 shade bands, whichever comes first. So for example, you might have a run of 35 feet of shades and decide to use a couple of 17-foot shades that are slaved together that one motor drives. We can help you set this up, and of course, you want your shade bands breaks to take place at vertical mullions. This is always the case, so you want to set it up so that it looks best for your project. Sometimes you can do a 20-foot shade, but you might decide aesthetically that 2 10-foot shades might look better in your space. Might be a little less screeny looking for your project. Well, we'll drive those with one motor, and they'll completely line up. That's another thing about the WhisperShade IQ technology, by the way. It ensures that your shades are very precisely lined up in your space, which we know is very important. The next thing you want to look at is the profile. How much room do I need to mount these shades? The best way to mount them, by the way, is if you're designing a new project, is to design your shades into a pocket so that they fully disappear when they're, fully up. And also this allows us to slave the shade bands together because they're contiguous and we can make them work that way. But the rolled up diameter of these shades is surprisingly compact. For example, you might have a shade that's 20 feet long and it can still fit in like a 5-inch by 5-inch space. Now we have pockets that we make at Mecco Systems for the shade bands to go into, but the smallest one is 5 inches by 5 inches. And we find that most shades, if it's a single shade band, sometimes we do double shades with one sunscreen and one room darkening shade, but if it's a single shade band, usually it can fit in a 5-inch by 5-inch space, which is surprisingly compact. The other thing you're going to want to know is how to wire these things. We know that you work with electrical engineers all the time, and so do we. We have simple wiring diagrams available for all of our shading systems, which I can shoot to your electrical engineer, and they're so simple. Usually the electrical engineer looks at them and says, oh, this is easy, I understand this. Particularly with the WhisperShade IQ technology, because everything is inside of the motor. The other thing you have to watch out for on your project is somebody might want to say substitute your intelligent motors for what we call dumb motors. Dumb motors mean that they're okay motors, but they're a little louder and they can't really operate on their own. They require what we call motor logic controllers to organize them. And this can be very costly because if you're using the dumb motor technology, usually for every 4 motors you're going to need one of these motor logic controllers to help organize them, which are line voltage themselves. They have to be home run to the power, and also they're pretty expensive. So if you have a large project with a lot of motors, that can add a component that we don't need anymore. Our WhisperShade IQ motors have that built into them, which is an incredible advancement. So these are some of the things to consider when you're specifying electroshades on your project. As usual, of course, we're available to consult with you, and we always encourage you to go to shannoncorporation.com, where we've made it a point to have many typical construction details, sections and elevations, specifications, full specifications for all of the different systems, and also even a section with unique projects that we've encountered. So visit our website and give us a call, and we'll help you have a successful project.